This is CD Player Helmet, and this is a pretty beefy 3D printer. Let's see if I, a 3D modeling and printing beginner, can turn one of my favorite illustrations into a 3D printed wall hanging sculpture. My CD Player Helmet design consists of two parts: a CD player that has been fashioned into a futuristic looking space helmet, and the human head that sits inside. Getting the helmet and the head to fit together correctly might be a bit of a challenge, so I'm going to create a basic test sculpt first using Nomad Sculpt on my iPad. And when I say basic, I mean basic. Okay, let's look at my first test print, and it doesn't work. Like, at all. I somehow made the helmet and the face the exact same height, which means there's literally no way that she is fitting inside of there. Okay, this initial sculpt is a complete failure. Let's try again. I don't want to repeat my mistakes from last time, so I'm going to split this new helmet into two parts. And just to be extra sure that the helmet and the head will fit together, I've cut chunks out of CD Girl's cheeks so that the CD player can sit in place. Let's see if this one works. Okay, this is a huge improvement from my last design, and it looks very similar to my illustration, but I've just had an idea. The printer that I'm using is the Bambu Lab X1C, and it features an AMS system, or Automatic Material System. This AMS can hold 4 different colours of filament at a time, and my CD Player Helmet illustration has 4 main colours. This means that I can save a lot of time by just printing the colours instead of painting them on. Okay, let's give this another go. First things first, I'm going to totally remodel CD Girl's face. My favourite feature of hers are her CD-shaped pupils, so I'm sculpting them onto the model now to make the painting easier later on. Now I can start to work on her helmet. If I'm going to print the helmet in multiple colours, it will need to fit together like a puzzle. So I'm going to use Nomad Sculpt's voxel subtraction feature for this. Voxel subtraction is pretty much like deleting the overlap between 2 or more shapes. Once you've deleted that overlap, it leaves a space in between that means the shapes can align perfectly, like this. Anyway, after many hours of adding, subtracting, and watching Nomad Sculpt tutorials on YouTube, I now have lots of puzzle pieces that can fit together to form the CD Player helmet. Also, because this sculpture will need to hang on the wall once it's complete, I'm voxel subtracting a hanger hole into the back panel. Okay, 3rd time's the charm. Let's print this out and see if it can fit together. Oh my god, finally! The helmet assembles super easily, the head sits perfectly in place, and the small details look great. I feel way more confident that this is going to work, so let's separate the colours and send it off to my 3D printer. One of my favourite things about this printer is actually the time-lapse feature. There's a tiny little camera inside which takes a picture of every layer, and then you can watch it back all at the end. It's very, very satisfying. A few of the pieces did need to be reprinted due to some minor surface errors, but it's not too much hassle. It makes more sense to reprint them now rather than spending hours sanding all the imperfections down later. Okay, after a few hours, I now have the white main helmet sections, the blue cover piece, lid and visor, a tiny CD, 2 speakers, an antenna, a row of buttons, 6 mini circle buttons, and CD Girl's head. I am so impressed with how smooth all of these are. They are going to be so satisfying to paint. And speaking of which, let's start painting them. Most of these helmet parts have already been printed in the correct colour, but there is one piece in particular that needs the most work, and that is CD Girl's face. After priming the surface with spray filler primer and allowing it to dry, I'm layering several thin coats of peach-toned model paint on top. This new skin tone will be much closer to the original illustration. Looking good. Okay, let's work on her eyes. This white model paint is slightly sheer, so I'm laying 4 to 5 thin coats to make it opaque. Next up, I'm using black model paint to fill in her irises and eyeliner. Remember when I added the CD-shaped pupils in the 3D model? I am so glad I did, because it's making it so much easier to paint these details on. To paint her lips, I'm mixing some red, pink, and beige paint to create the perfect lipstick shade. I like to make the top lip slightly darker than the bottom lip in my illustration, so I'm also doing the same here. All that's left to add is her beauty mark, lashes, and eyebrows. Now that CD Girl's face has been fully painted, decorating the helmet is next on my list. After painting a darker shade of blue inside of the lid and the disc space areas, I'm carefully filling in the smaller white details, like the front flower decal and the closures. The grey row of buttons that sit in the centre of the helmet also need their own decals, but I really don't want to mess these up, so I'm sketching them on first with a white pencil. Before I paint the smaller buttons, I'm going to assemble the white sections of the helmet and stick them all into place. This allows me to hold the helmet steady whilst I paint on the teeny tiny symbols. And here's a fun fact, my original CD player helmet illustration features 2 eject button symbols. This was actually a mistake that I made whilst using the symmetry tool. I don't know, I think it's kind of funny, so I've done the same on my sculpture. Okay, I've attached some more of the helmet together and it's looking pretty good so far, so let's finish it off by painting the speakers. I've decided to keep the speaker grills pretty simple by just using a dotting tool to create rows and rows of white dots. It's not perfect, but it saved my time and sanity, so I am happy. And before I forget, I'm going to cover the 3D printed CD in this holographic self-adhesive film. This process is fairly self-explanatory. I'm just sticking on the film and cutting around the edges, like this. And there we have it, one CD player helmet and mini CD. But I'm not done just yet. There is still a very important part of this entire sculpture that I have not made, and that is the visor. I've never made something this thin and clear before, so I'd be lying if I said I'm not slightly intimidated by the thought of it. But as always, I have to persevere, so after a bit of research, I've come across this stuff called UV resin. It's a synthetic resin that cures when it's exposed to UV light. And this got me thinking, I already have a 3D printed visor, so in theory I should be able to layer UV resin over the top and peel it off, right? I have no idea if that will work, so let's give it a go. After applying and curing several thin layers of the UV resin, I'm now adding some layers of green UV resin. This should turn the visor a slightly translucent green colour, just like my original drawing. Okay, the resin has now fully cured, so let's remove it from the 3D print. The resin seems to be stuck on pretty well, so I'm rather dangerously using my craft knife to pry it. Let's try again, I guess. Okay, take 2. Let me not use my craft knife this time. And okay, it's come off in one piece. It's not as smooth as I would like it to be, but for my second attempt with a material that I have never used before, I think it's good enough. All of the pieces for this CD player helmet sculpture are now complete, so let's assemble it using some super glue and see how it looks. As a 3D modelling and printing beginner, this entire project was one very steep learning curve. I don't think I've ever experienced this much trial and error before, but the finished sculpture has really opened my eyes to the world of 3D printing. If I can make this, what else can I make? I'm very proud of this sculpture, so I've 3D printed a hook for my IKEA pegboard so that she can watch me whilst I work. Also, before I go, I'd love to give a huge thank you to Bambu Lab for sending me this 3D printer and all of the filament. I really couldn't have created this without them. Should I make some more sculptures using my 3D printer? Let me know in the comments below. Okay, thank you so much for watching and subscribing, wink wink, and I will see you in the next video.